Right now, as you're hearing this sentence, there's a voice in your head. Not mine, yours. It's reading these words to you, converting letters into sound inside your skull. You've been doing this your entire life, narrating your morning, rehearsing conversations, arguing with yourself in the shower. But here's what's strange. The person sitting next to you on the bus, your coworker, your partner, there's roughly a 1 in 3 chance they don't have that voice at all. No inner monologue, no narrator, just silence. And that fact changes everything we think we know about what it means to think. Let's start with something basic. You assume everyone thinks the way you do, in words, in sentences. A little voice that says, "I should grab coffee," or "that was embarrassing," or "what if I said the wrong thing?" You've had this voice for so long that it feels like the definition of consciousness. It feels like you. But for roughly 250,000 years, modern humans walked the earth. They made tools. They buried their dead. They crossed oceans. And for most of that time, they may have done all of it without a single word running through their heads. That's not speculation. That's the logical consequence of what we now know about the inner voice and where it comes from. The person who cracked this open wasn't a philosopher. It was a psychologist named Russell Hurlburt at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. Starting in the 1990s, Hurlburt developed a deceptively simple method. He gave people beepers, random beeps throughout the day. When the beep went off, you had to freeze and report exactly what was happening in your mind at that precise moment. Not what you were thinking about, how you were thinking. Were there words, images, feelings? Nothing at all? He did this for decades, thousands of samples, and what he found shocked even him. Only about 26% of people reported frequent inner speech. Some people experienced it almost constantly, a running monologue from morning to night. Others reported it maybe 5% of the time, and some, a significant minority, reported almost none. Their thinking was visual, spatial, emotional, abstract patterns without language. They solved problems, made decisions, fell in love, and navigated the entire complexity of human life without narrating any of it. But that's only half the story, because it's not just that some people lack inner speech, it's that the people who have it don't understand what it actually is. In 2013, a team led by Mark Scott at the University of British Columbia published a study that revealed something remarkable about what happens in your brain when you talk to yourself. They found that inner speech activates Broca's area, the region responsible for producing spoken language, almost identically to the way it activates when you speak out loud. Your brain is generating real speech, full motor commands. The signals travel down toward your vocal cords, your tongue, your lips. But somewhere along the way, the brain issues a counter-signal, an efference copy. It cancels the movement before it reaches your muscles. You are literally talking. Your brain is just muting the output. Think about that for a second. Your inner voice isn't some ethereal stream of consciousness. It's aborted speech. Your brain is running the entire machinery of language production, forming words, constructing grammar, modulating tone, and then intercepting it at the last millisecond. You're having a conversation with no one, or more accurately, you're having a conversation with yourself using a system that evolved to talk to other people. And this is where it gets complicated. The Russian psychologist Lev Vygotsky proposed something in the 1930s that we're only now beginning to fully appreciate. He watched children and noticed something universal. Young kids talk to themselves out loud, constantly. Now I'm putting the red block here. No, that doesn't fit. I'll try the blue one. Psychologists call this private speech, and Vygotsky argued that this wasn't just childish babbling, it was the scaffold of thought itself. As children age, this outer speech doesn't disappear. It goes underground. It becomes inner speech. The voice in your head is, in a very real sense, the internalized voice of your childhood. The conversations you had with parents and caregivers, folded inward and compressed into thought. This means your inner voice isn't native to your mind. It was installed by language, by culture, by the people who raised you. Now let's pause here, because this leads somewhere uncomfortable. In 1976, psychologist Julian Jaynes published a book that most of academia dismissed as brilliant nonsense. He argued that ancient humans, as recently as 3,000 years ago, didn't experience consciousness the way we do. They heard their own thoughts as external voices, commands from gods. When they made a decision, they didn't experience deliberation, they experienced instruction. The voice in their head wasn't theirs, it belonged to something else. Janes called this the bicameral mind, and while the theory remains controversial, modern neuroscience keeps stumbling into findings that make it harder to ignore entirely. The inner voice, the one you think of as yourself, it has a history, it had a beginning, and not everyone got the same version. So that settles it, right? The inner voice is just language turned inward, and some people have more of it than others. Well, not quite. Because here's the part almost nobody talks about. Recent work by Famira Raci and colleagues, published in 2022, found that inner speech doesn't just reflect your thoughts, it shapes them. People with more active inner monologues show different patterns of emotional regulation. They ruminate more, they plan more, they also worry more. The voice is a tool, but it's a tool that can malfunction. When psychologists study people with anxiety and depression, they consistently find that the inner voice has become hostile. It's no longer narrating, it's attacking. You're not good enough. They don't like you. You're going to fail. The same mechanism that lets you rehearse a job interview is the one that keeps you awake at 3 a.m. replaying every mistake you made in 2019. And it gets stranger. People who think primarily without words, the ones Hurlburt calls unsymbolized thinkers, they're not worse at reasoning. They're not less intelligent. In some studies, they actually show faster reaction times on certain tasks because they skip the bottleneck of language entirely. They don't need to translate a visual problem into words, solve it verbally, and translate it back. They just solve it. The inner voice, for all its power, is also a filter, a compression algorithm that forces the infinite bandwidth of raw thought into the narrow channel of sequential language. One word after another, one sentence at a time. When your mind could be processing dozens of streams simultaneously. But what if the voice isn't just a tool for thinking? What if it's a tool for being someone? Charles Fernyhough, a psychologist at Durham University, has spent years studying the phenomenology of inner speech. In his 2016 book, he argues that the inner voice is how we construct identity. It's the narrator that turns a stream of disconnected experiences into a story, your story. Without it, you'd still perceive the world. You'd still react. You'd still feel. But you wouldn't narrate yourself into existence the way you do. You wouldn't say, I am the kind of person who, or I always, or I never. The voice creates the character, and the character is you. This might be why losing the inner voice feels so disorienting. People who experience sudden silence, through meditation, through trauma, through neurological events, often describe it not as losing a thought process, but as losing themselves. The narrator goes quiet, and the self it was narrating flickers. Who are you when you stop telling yourself who you are? Here's what's actually happening inside you right now. There's a voice reading this. It's using the same neural circuits you'd use to whisper to a friend. Your brain is constructing sounds that don't exist, sending commands to muscles that don't move, and then listening to the silence as though someone spoke. That voice has been with you since childhood. It was built from the voices of people who loved you, or failed to. It has kept you company on every lonely night, rehearsed every difficult conversation, and narrated every triumph and humiliation. It has also lied to you, told you things about yourself that weren't true, kept you up when you needed sleep, turned on you when you needed kindness. It is the most intimate relationship you will ever have, a conversation that started before you can remember and will only end when you do. And the strangest part isn't that you've been talking to yourself your whole life. The strangest part is that for most of human history, that voice wasn't there at all. Your ancestors thought in color, in motion, in feeling, in pure pattern recognition without a single syllable. And somewhere along the way, someone started whispering, and we never stopped.